Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 39th episode of Concerned Dabs podcast. I am your host. Oh, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. This is the 40th episode of Concerned Dabs podcast. I'm your host, Katie M. Kane. Tonight's guest, ladies and gentlemen, we have Hash Brixen, aka HashMan, from HashMan Seed Company. Are you with us, Mr. Brixen?
Hey, what's up, man? Thanks for having me on the show.
No doubt, dude. We appreciate you taking the time, man. It means a lot. I feel like we have really good episodes when we talk to breeders, man. The creativity level through the roof. So I enjoy talking to guys like that, man. Um, so I know we talked for about 15, 10 minutes before we started today. I know, I might get redundant and ask those questions again, but any of our listeners who are on right now didn't get to hear any of those, I'm gonna just resort to my cookie cutter questions really quick. So you're based out of the East Coast, correct, Mr. Brick?
Oh yeah, Beast Coast breeder. Been in the tri-state area. We hit the events like the Harvest Cup in Worcester, Mass. We've hit a couple other events. I mean, it's a developing scene out here, so we're trying to get in with people and help as much as we can.
Fuck yeah, man. Fuck yeah. Okay, so my next cookie cutter question. How did you decide on breeding as your area of focus or trade in Canada?
Well, I've been breeding cannabis since I was around 13 or 14. And I mean, at the time back then, I was buying eights for like $60 off the black market. And, that's ridiculous pricing even way back in the day. So, I got a couple seeds together. I started growing. Over time, you grow a real appreciation for the plant and eventually, got into land race and stuff like that, breeding heirlooms.
That's dope, man. So I asked you this question before too, and I saw you post stuff like this on Facebook. So you talk about breeding with land race, and in one of the posts it was like, most of everything that comes out nowadays is just hype based on an OG cross, like whatever the new OG cross is like that's the new hype. And you talk about breeding with landrace genetics as opposed to the latest shit. So can you go into detail on that and talk for a minute, dude? As much as you want to elaborate on that. I'm interested by your beliefs on that.
Well, where to start? Land race, like, man, that's where it all started. That's the root of the culture. I mean, in third world countries, there's still farmers that thrive and survive off of these plants, and they're known as land race. They could be domestic, they could be feral, and I mean, today's hybrids, I mean, they're breeding just for THC. And I mean, THC is one cannabinoid out of at least 200 cannabinoids that are still being researched today. And land races are known to be more biodiverse than the hybrids that you see on the market today. I love land races. I mean, you work with land races over time, you grow appreciation for the plant, and you learn something. You gain a certain type of culture, and that's where it starts for breeding. You gain a respect for the plant, and then you work your way up. I mean, nowadays growers, I mean, don't get me wrong, high THC is cool and all, but I mean, it's all about the terpenes really and the flavor profiles and getting into it with the breeding. If you want to breed something
Yes.
that's unique, then you need to work with something that's unique. I mean, if you love OG, grow OG. Yeah, that's cool. But if you're trying to hit the market commercially with something that's fire, it's not going to be another cut of OG. I mean, if you go on Seed Finder, there's like several different myths about where OG came from, and then off
Yeah.
those seven cuts, there's like I don't know hundreds of crosses. So I mean, it really depends where the supply and demand is. But personally, I mean, loving the culture, loving breeding and all that study, genetics, whatever. Landrace is where it's at.
No doubt, man. No doubt. And then another thing that you added earlier was talking about being able to germinate the seeds, like if they're super old or from really far away and in a totally different place. So can you talk about some of those germination methods on landrace seeds or seeds that are really old in someone's library they might want to wake up and start working with again?
Oh yeah, I've worked with genetics. I mean, going far back, documented 1960s, and some of these genetics. I mean, with the normal breeding methods and normal germination methods, they wouldn't normally grow properly or even germinate properly. And I mean, you really have to take some care for them. For example, old school beans, I would recommend that you soak pinto beans in water overnight, and what that does is release an enzyme that helps germinate the embryo of older seeds and stuff like that. Or seeds, for example, some seeds have a harder outside shell, and they call it the matchbook trick. And it's where you take the seed and you lightly rub it against a matchbox, and it what it does is it softens the shell so the embryo can germinate. And there's methods out there. It really depends on what genetics you're working with. I mean, you can't really compare Afghani seeds to Thai seeds. Thai seeds require a certain level of TLC, and Afghani seeds, I mean, they're tough shells, but most of them will germinate in comparison to Thai seeds. And it's just really how in depth you really want to get with it. I mean, I've had people giving me genetics that they just saved the seeds from 1970, 1980, and I've been able to get them germinate myself. And then I hooked the person up with cuttings, and that's how we preserve the culture.
Fuck yeah, dude. And like that's one thing I noticed on your menu list too is everything seems uh really different names and not attached to any sort of hype that's current, but more attached to either where it's from or effects given. Um, it looked like a lot of them were bred for hash. I mean, Hash Hands is the name of the company, I guess. Can you talk about like that, dude? Like is that what you were? I mean, because that's what it looks like. If you want to run solventless, then crack some of these and see what happens. You know what but in addition to that, like yeah, dude, like if you can talk about you know what you look for when you're choosing phenotypes to breed for a project or to start a new project, and then also what your goals are, with the projects that you've done and stuff that you're working on right now.
I mean, with my line of breeding and the field of study that I research and work with, I create heirlooms out of land races. So, I mean, once those heirlooms get interbred and hybridized over time, they no longer are considered heirlooms. So, I mean, in this day and age, it's hard to find these land races. I'm bringing them back and crossing them into my own unique heirlooms. And I encourage other people to do the same if they can get their hands on the land races or if they already have them. Grow them, preserve them, and breed them properly. When it comes to breeding genetics, it's not as much as preservation as how you breed them and what techniques you use. I mean, if you hermaphrodize lineage over time, it's going to remain hermaphrodized in a certain percentage. It's not going to be feminized which is the common misconception out there. I mean, when it comes to breeding for me, it depends really on what each cultivar can give me in terms of genetics and various traits and such as that. I mean, when you're looking at it, there's recessive and dominant traits in each gene pool. And these land races are so biodiverse that you can pull as many phenotypes through hybridization as you'll see on today's commercial market. And I mean, you're working with like South African, North African, you're seeing high levels of THCV and high levels of THC. So as I said, it really depends what your end goal is. And that's why I try to encourage people, because if you're looking for clean medicine, you're looking for sophisticated medicine that helps you as a person, as an individual, you got to breed it yourself. You're not going to find something in the commercial market that really atones to your genetic structure. I mean, they're doing studies nowadays about soulmate strands and genetics and cultivars that work better with our genetics as individuals. And I mean, yeah, I breed a lot for hash mostly because I love hash, you know. We're moving
Yeah.
more over to solventless rather than liquid distillation. And you know, especially with the fresh pressed rosin, man. Like a lot of our cultivars, like they're rich in ester alcohols and all sorts of terpenes that most of the genetics on the common market, like they get so hybridized that they become generic. So we try to look for unique terpene profiles, unique chemovars, phenotypes. I mean, as far as it goes, I would rather open pollination, a gene pool, to preserve the genetics rather than dwarf a certain phenotype. And that's just my own opinion, though.
Word. Yeah, like that's I agree, dude. I've seen guys do it both ways. But it seems like if you're a fan of a certain strain, then like take more than one male that you like and fucking hit the females for one round just to save seeds of it. You know what I mean?
Definitely, man. Definitely.
And it's you can pick winners out of there. But that was another when you were talking about the gene pool diversity and everything too. This is a question that I had for you that I read a lot of shit online, you know. I check out the forums, I watch YouTube, you know, but it's dope talking to guys who do it. The question I have is, how do you feel about breeding with feminized seed? There's Obama Kush was one of my favorite fucking strains, bro, and I can't find any regular seeds of it. Like they're all feminine, and so it's like to do any sort of cross with that, or to you know like it I'm leery of it, but I've seen other people do it. It's like it's Obama Kush cross with this, but I've never cracked any of those seeds and see if they're stable. You know, they start herming after a couple rounds. I don't know, but that was always one of my favorites, and I was afraid to work with it because it seems like it's feminized. So can you talk about that or answer that question as best you can, man?
Well, that's what I meant when I was mentioning the landrace and commercial market genetics now. Like Obama Kush, I mean, I don't know too much about it. There's so many Kushes out there, though. Like prior to the Obama election, that could have been a different type of Kush under a different name, you know? It
Yeah,
happens all
the
the time. But
Mr. Nice
when
is
it comes
another Mr. Nice is another one that seemed exactly like it, but just a different name. You know what I mean? Mr.
Well,
Nice
that's what's
Kush or something like
awesome
that.
about chemo photography and stuff like that is that we can get these terpene profiles tested at the labs nowadays and find relatives that are similar. And I mean, even if they weren't cultured in the same environment, they could be relatives. So, I mean, when it comes to pheno hunting, you'll most likely run into a couple similar phenotypes from different gene pools and especially with the I can't even say it, feminization. Um, there's a lot of methods that people go by, like selfing a plant through stress that causes hermaphrodation, and that's not a recommended method. There's silver spray. I use silver spray for feminization, but I don't feminize my genetics past around three to fourth generation. Otherwise, you will see hermaphrodization. You will see lack of performance and vigor. And personally, I like to keep them photo period and regular in their pure form. I mean, when I'm inbreeding genetics and land races, that's just to preserve the line. If I'm only working with a couple seeds that I could get my hands on, with the hybrids on the market today and stuff like that, they're being feminized to the point where they're becoming sterile. And by crossing them with other genetics, like we were talking about before, like Tangy, anything you cross with Tangy is Tangy because it's so homogeneous of the genetics are so dominant. And I mean, even the terpene profile translates through hybridization. So, I mean, it's the same with all the genetic that are on the market now. A lot of them are just renamed, and you see a lot of that happening, or feminization techniques that are not working, like the hermaphrodization and stressing genetics out. I mean, it really depends where you're getting your genetics from, man.
No doubt, no doubt. Like, so another thing too is like Gorilla Glue number 4. Like that shit. Every single time I ran that, it popped seeds. Like it hermed out. You know what I mean? Like it seemed really unstable, but it's still really pop. And it seems like people still breed with that too. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of different crosses with it. So I mean, do you think most of that shit is like a waste of time too, or it's just crack these one time and see how it goes? If you try and hold on to it for a long time, it's gonna start popping seeds anyway.
I mean, it really depends what your end goal is with breeding. I mean, if you're trying to preserve a certain lineage and gene pool, I mean, hold on to it, you know. But personally, I don't feel any sort of way towards elite cuts and preservation of elite cuts. Gorilla Glue is one of those hype genetics that are been out there. I don't know how long now, and you know, probably was introduced to the market before under a different name. So, I mean, we
Yeah.
see that a lot in today's industry. So, I mean, personally, I wouldn't breed Gorilla Glue knowing that it's going to hurt me with my genetics because it's just going to carry those traits over time. And I mean, what are you really looking for in the Gorilla Glue gene pool that you want to risk with hermaphrodization? Because, I mean, it takes a couple generations of offspring to get rid of the hermaphrodites. And I mean, the hermaphrodization gene, it's mostly stress induced.
Yeah, like a lot of times too, like I did intake and inventory at a dispensary called Human Collective for a few months, and some guys that continuously bring in some bomb shit, and you know, every now and then they bring in something that they're like, man, you know, you knock a few bills off this, there's a few seeds in there, and I'm, what the fuck? I'm like, why? Like, what do you mean why? I'm like, well, why is there seeds in? And they'd be like, well, I don't know, man. I'm like, was it just unstable genetics or what? Like, man, I don't know. And I'm like, were these plants by the door? And they just fucking look at me like, how the fuck do you know that? I'm like, bro, I bet you there's a crack. You know what I mean? There's a little bit of light leak and it's fucking making these ones fucking stress out and gross when they're supposed to be sleeping. You know what I mean? It just,
I mean, you never really know when it comes to that sort of thing. I mean, that's really where it comes down to trusted sources and reputable breeders and stuff like that. You know, each breeder has their own technique of how they do it, and some are better at what they do. You know, like I don't knock other breeders, but I've seen some of these hype genetics do horribly, like compared to the photos on the seed packets.
fuck yeah. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, man. It's that's where reputation really comes into play, dude. Like if you follow a guy on IG and you're a fan of his stuff and you meet him at a trade show and you run his stuff and it looks exactly like it did in his photos, you know what I mean? Like yeah, like it feels really good. And but I'm sure there's stories of people where it's not like that. It's like fuck, I bought some shit from a
I mean,
guy who
I
said
mean,
he was
it also depends on the grower too. You can't always knock the breeder. I mean, I've had people come and meet me in person at shows just to shake my hand and be like, "Oh, I grew your hash brick, and it was so diverse in flavor." And they give me compliments on it, and that's what feels good about doing this kind of trade and career. And I mean, it's slowly developing over time. I mean, colleges are offering courses for master degrees and stuff like that. So, in time, this could be a legitimate career for the East Coast.
Yeah, dude, it seems like legalization is really happening out there too, dude. Like and guys are making moves. And that's I talk about this every single episode, Hash Bricks, and but I gotta say it again, no matter what, if it's federally legalized, I want everybody to be able to grow their own app, like making people go to the store is just not the thing to do, man. Like everybody should be able to grow what they like and trade with their neighbor.
That's how I feel about it. I mean, I was a medical patient through the registry here, and the dispensaries, they're ridiculous. They say they have sliding scale. The product isn't professionally grown. It's not for medical consumption, and I'd rather see people learn how to do it through trial and error and be able to be like, oh, well, that's where I messed up. I can do better next time, or I can breed a better cultivar that meets my needs. I mean, that's where the real market is headed.
Yeah, man, I agree. And yeah, totally. Cause it just I moved to Arizona from Oregon 2 years ago. I'm moving back to Washington in a month. This getting my car down here and going to the stores, like the level of product knowledge by the average patient and the person behind the counter selling it is just very small in comparison to Oregon. And I honestly feel like the difference is being able to cultivate your own. Like the rule here in AZ is you can't cultivate your own medicine as a patient unless you live 25 miles from a dispensary, which eliminates like 95% of the whole state, dude, which is whack. So on the rec ballot, it's written for 6 plants, which I think is dope, but I also feel the same way in Washington. I was in Spokane a few weeks ago over the holidays, and the girls behind the counter there too didn't really know much about what they were selling other than what was on the label. And I feel like if they had the opportunity to grow their own, they would know a lot more about the product that they're selling, how it's made, and also what would work best for them and other people, and then encourage other people to do the same. It's a bummer when you go to a store and they don't sell clones or seeds, It's like it should be in every store. There should be
Well, that's where the divide in the industry's been recognized is that, I mean, these dispensaries are shunning the black market professional growers who've been at it for years, who've refined their genetics, and they're hiring people off the street to bud tend that have basic knowledge or being trained on the spot at the dispensary. It's really
yeah.
hard for growers who developed skills prior to prohibition to get into the industry and market their craft. I mean, that's what we're waiting for is licensing over on the East Coast here. And I mean, the system and the regulations and all the requirements you have to go through, it's tedious, especially
Hell
for
yeah.
growers who are living off of what they have.
Yeah, dude, serious. Like Like in Oregon, they said there was going to be no out of state money, and then they changed that rule, and then all this big money came in and fucked shit up, and it's so flooded. I don't know, dude. Like I tried my ass off to get a fucking rec license in Oregon for 2 years, dude, and I couldn't make it happen. And in hindsight, I'm like, fuck. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because if I would have got that loan or that investor, I would still be in the red. You know what I mean? So it's like, um, the size of the market matters too, dude. You know what I mean? Like the pie is only this big depending on how many people live in the state. And they say, yeah, we tourism is on the. It's like, man, that's not the pie. You know what I mean? That's less than a thin slice of the pie. Like there's this many people that live in the state, and this much weed being purchased. It's like it it sucked not being able to make that happen, but there's windows in other places, and it's cool that you're in a place that's extremely populated, and you got the skill set, and hopefully you jump through those hoops, dude, because that was the thing too in Oregon. Once it went red, it was like you had to be zoned for agricultural, and all these places were like warehouses, industrial, so it's like they had to get all these waivers signed. There's so many hoops to jump through that most people who are just, like you're saying, growing medically, whatever's left over is like we can put back into the operation, but it's like you can't invest in all that shit and then change locations to something that's more convenient, especially when real estate people are hip to it. You know what I mean? As soon as they hear cannabis, they try to turn that rent up times four, and it just it was just really tough to deal with, man.
Oh
Can
yeah,
you
man.
talk
I
about that?
definitely
Can you talk about that on the East Coast from your angle on that, man? Because I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different hurdles out there, but are similar. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean we face as much struggles as the West Coast out here, and I mean we're facing the hurdles of like a startup industry, whereas Cali's already been established, and now they're dealing with regulations over there and stuff like that. I mean I'm sure the West Coast has their fair share of monopolies, but we're seeing it a lot to the point where the FBI is getting involved because these state-funded governments are running monopolies on cannabis operations. They're charging out the ass for licensing. They're making all these requirements so tedious that it doesn't make sense to any grower besides corporations. And then you have all these corporate conglomerates coming in, investing in these operations. They're buying them out for wholesale price. I mean, I think I saw a couple of dispensaries sell out in Massachusetts to a wholesale brand name. And sure, it looks glamorous. You've been in the game for a while. You just start a dispensary and you get offered a $500,000 check to sell your business. I mean, who wouldn't turn that down? I mean, it's just how the game is, and
Yeah, it's a
it's
lot of
kind of
loot.
messed up that because I mean all these states are kind of capitalizing on the industry in their own way, and in each state it's failing miserably. I mean, all these monopolies on cannabis, it's never going to happen. I mean, the best step forward is to tax and regulate it where it accustoms the grower, the craft, and the culture, as well as the consumer.
Yeah, dude, that was always my angle or my take on it in Oregon too. Is once it went rec, like putting all these obstacles in the way of medical growers, because it's like as a medical grower for a few years, you could grow some bomb shit, pay for it to get tested, and then go and drop it off at a store and wait 2 weeks and go and collect, bro. Like that was like a legit hustle for a couple years. Like I missed that shit a lot, and once it went, that was done. And it's like all these obstacles to get licensed are whack, because in my mind it's like the state could either get the tax at the point of sale or not. You know what I mean? And they're trying to like whittle away at all of the medical growers. You have to register with the seed to sale tracking system if you have more than two patients. And it just, it's whack all around. You have to get permission from the person that you're leasing from in writing that says you're okay to fucking grow, even just with one card if you're a medical grower in Oregon. So it's just a, like they keep just throwing shit at it. And it's like, yo, this is where the real
That's
talent is
because
at. You know what I mean? Like
they're
you
trying to
could get the money
gentrify
at
the
the point of
industry.
sale or not. Yeah. So like can you talk about that, man? I didn't mean to interrupt. Like that was just my take on it. I just wanted to share that with you. So if you want to elaborate, please do, Mr.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what you're saying, man. Over in Oregon, they're just like gentrifying the industry and then trying to figure out ways to monetize on it. I mean, like it's the consumer, that's the people, and then the people running the business are also the people. You know, you can't just look at dollar signs and expect to monetize on businesses created by people who have hopes for this industry. You know, I mean, I wouldn't call it a gold rush, but there are people out there that are skilled sources of knowledge who could apply their skill sets to the industry, and it would be prolific for each state. I mean, it really depends on how you go about it. I mean, I'm seeing a lot of the wrong people in the wrong industry. They're getting into it for the wrong reasons. They're investing in all sorts of things. And I mean, as I said, it really depends how you go about it. But I mean, I see a lot of gentrification going on, and that's how it is from my perspective, at least. I've heard a lot from other people. As you've seen, I got a lot of followers with the hash hands, and I mean, a lot of people out there, they have an opinion and they like to be heard.
Yeah, fuck yeah, dude. Like that's why we're doing the show, man. You know, 'cause
Oh yeah,
we have we have concerns about the industry too. Shout out to Will Terps, man. We hope he returns soon, man. But it is like it's legit. Like we want to see small craft breeders and growers still do their thing and be able to flourish, man, through legalization. And it just big money is kind of ruining that and gentrifying it, man, and it's kind of sad. So we got to try and voice our opinions, and hopefully people listen and express their opinions to their local senator, I guess. You know what I mean? Because like if it's for federal legalization, those guys are gonna say yes or say no. I don't think we can sign a petition as a country and get it to pass that way. It's like those guys got to do it on their own, and hopefully they make that correct choice. Shit,
the
dude.
best thing people can do is get involved in the regulation process and find out what their local government is planning for regulation of their state or neighborhood. You know, it really depends where, you know, it falls to regulation and overregulated. I mean, I think everybody's seen that Illinois just legalized, and it's incredibly inflated. I saw a post on Facebook. Uh, First guy that went to the legal dispensary, rec dispensary, paid $80 an eighth for an OG phenotype,
Fuck,
and
that's
I was just
crazy.
baffled. I was like, I used to buy eighths of real OG when I was like 14 for $60, man.
Yeah. And man, yeah, that's crazy. Cause like in Washington, I worked for my uncle in Washington for the year 2013 and 2014. He had a warehouse grow that was medical, and then when they went rec, bro, like there was only one room at first when it was medical, and then it was three rooms once they got the license. And like it was based on population like the liquor stores are. You could only get a retail license based on how many people lived in your city. And so the people that got them knew that there was going to be a shortage in supply too. And so when we were trimming that shit up, dude, I swear, like 3 different stores came through, like their owners came through, looked at what we were, and they negotiated a price and paid for it right then before we were even done. So before it was done, it was sold, and I think they got four, bro, like four per pack. You know what I mean? So I was like, holy shit, a lot of money, dude, and it only lasted for a year or two, you know what I mean? They eventually granted more licenses and then it flooded. It just it was strange to see that kind of inflation too, where something that usually would go for, between 2 or 3 was going for 4. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
just
I mean,
because.
I've seen some crazy stuff like that, especially in our neck of the woods. Some people are crazy. I mean, I've had people come up to me and tell me that I should charge people more for my craft and what I do. And I mean, there's a certain point where you're just inflating things, and what's the point of that? It just makes it harder on everybody else. I mean, I understand people got to make a profit, but there's a fine line between greed and need.
I agree. Yeah, like when dudes are selling a 10 pack of seeds for 250 bucks, I'm like, dude, come on, man. Like that's a lot, you know. So I just it's I agree, man. Like dudes got to make a profit. What do your seeds go for, man? I hope you don't sell them for 200 bucks.
Right now, we're working on a few cultivars. I'm working on a couple um, unique heirlooms and stuff like that. Uh, it's not legal where we're living to supply anything of that nature, so we try to not really, advertise as much. I mean, we can go to states where it's legal and where people who cultivate our genetics are, and we can sell the seeds legally there. But it's really
Okay.
state dependent. And I mean, we hit all sorts of events. We're working out deals with seedmen.com, and a few other seed banks are going to be carrying our genetics soon. I mean, 2020 grow season, man. I have so many land races to work with right now. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, dude, I was looking at seedfinder.eu. It's like they got a whole list of a bunch of your stuff. Just like, yeah, man, yeah. I want to try and grab
Oh
some of
yeah,
those if you
we
guys.
make sure the right people get our seeds, man.
No doubt, no doubt. All right, so I'm gonna skip back to my cookie cutter questions for a second. Can you talk about some of your methods for solventless extraction? Like you make your own hash too.
I've done it all. I mean, personally, I've tried all sorts of concentrates, and when it comes to personal consumption, I'm a fan of liquid distillation. But when it comes to solventless, I'm more of a fresh press rosin guy. I love rosin presses like Sasquatch Tech and stuff like that, Roz Tech. Um, it
So
really depends
flour,
on the.
like smashing nugs is what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if you've seen some of the videos they have for reviews and stuff like that to show people, like they're just gorgeous. Like I went to an event, uh, well, last year, not really. It's the Harvest Cup in Worcester, Mass. There, the second annual one, and I think it was Sasquatch Tech that was there, and they were just pressing everybody's nugs for free. And you saw this guy; he came up with like 28 grams of dry shiv, and I mean the oil that came off of that, it just was beautiful, like pure rosin, man. That's where it's at, solventless, clean, chemical free, diverse. And I mean, it really depends what you use for a technique. Like, I had someone ask me if I prefer bubble hash over solventless fresh press. And bubble hash, I love bubble hash, but terpenes are water soluble and they get caught up in the leftover water and stuff like that, you know. And that's really where the concentrate game is preserving these terpenes and finding the right genetics that have those unique terpenes that you can extract.
Yeah, that's man, I that's a dope take on it because like that's one thing too. I wonder about breeding because it seems like most of the stuff that guys, it's like GMO cookies, right? If they're making water hash or something crossed with 98 bub, like that's what I see most of the time. It seems like because that's
Well,
like it makes the glands big enough, but what about the flavor? You know what I mean? So please
I mean,
elaborate some more, man.
they're really just extracting for higher THC levels, like the generic game that's out there, and I mean that's really where the industry was at its peak. Is like a lot of people are looking for high THC and stuff like that, and nowadays people are finding out there's over 200 different cannabinoids as well as terpenes and entourage effects in between each other in a symbiotic relationship. So I
Yeah.
mean it really depends what you're looking for. Like as I said, I love the land races because they're so biodiverse, and the chemovars you find are just ridiculously tasty and aromatic. Like I've had some Pakistani land races that have ester alcohols in them, and they're just so diverse because they haven't been altered or inbred to a certain point where they lose their luster.
So what is a benefit of ester alcohols? Like, does that like taste better, or does that like preserve shelf life or something? Can you talk about that? Talk about that a little?
Ester alcohols have to do a lot with the flavor and the flavonoids. Um, it's not really studied with cannabis. I think it was I first heard the term with Kevin Jordy. Um, he's a bit more experienced when it comes to those sorts of things. Um, I've just recently been getting into it with the ester alcohols. I'm still studying all sorts of stuff like that. When it comes down to the flavonoids and the terpenes, a lot of it's affected by the environment and variables like climate and stuff like that. So that's where the land races come into play. Is there's so many diverse flavors based upon the environment, and I mean, if you're working with these genetics nowadays, you don't really see as much as the diversity because the genetics, I mean, they're inbred or they're feminized to a certain point where you don't really see anything but high THC levels or mycelineary or stuff like that, you know?
Yeah, yeah, dude. Like, I dig the stuff that you're saying, Hash Brixton. Um, gonna skip back to my cookie cutter questions here. I like to ask this of everybody who's in the industry and who comes on the show. What do you feel was your smartest move on the path to where you are now?
My smartest move?
Yeah, yeah, you know what I mean? Like in
Well,
hindsight, because I'm sure you've done a lot of shit in your lifetime, and like there's times where you
I,
doubt yourself or you question the path that you're on. So it's like, what was your smartest move? Like, what did you feel best about? It's like if you hadn't have done this, you wouldn't have been here.
well, I guess my smartest move was researching, constantly researching, finding something that I can invest my time in and something that I love. Because, if you're not doing what you love, then what's the point of it? I mean, I'm not going to claim that I'm all knowledgeable about cannabis. I'm not the god of cannabis, but I do know my fair share. I mean,
Yeah.
and if I don't know something, I'm open minded enough to ask a question or understand what someone else has to bring to the table. And I mean, nowadays we're right now in the age where science is slowly figuring out all sorts of things. Like, I mean, there's people publishing cannabis genomes left and right. and mapping out all sorts of genetics and traits and stuff like that, breeding markers. And one of the people that's worth mentioning is Kevin from Medicinal Genomics. He's pioneering a lot of science over at Medicinal Genomics, and I mean it's just crazy. We're in the age of science, like sci-fi stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, dude, like that. I think I don't know if I asked you on the show yet, but I know we talked to it before. You mentioned Kevin. Did I ask you about Philos Bioscience? Like, what is your take on that and them trying to copyright genetics and prevent other breeders from basically owning their own shit that they worked on? You know what I mean?
I mean, there's a lot of hearsay out there about Philos Bioscience. Personally, I they were making claims from the beginning that just gave me a red flag. Like, I mean, when you're in the industry, you learn how to recognize who's the right people and who's the wrong people. And I mean, they were kind of playing this angle for a while where they wanted to help the breeder culture and develop the industry. And look what happened. I mean, a lot of people are complaining, saying that all their genetic data has been stolen or misused. And I mean, a lot of the data that Philos has is very generic data. I mean, it's basically genealogy, and I mean, it is useful in some sense, but to someone who breeds land races and stuff like that, to me, it's not that great. I mean, I don't see the big point. I mean, sure, Philos went and tried to sell out to Big Ag, but I mean, it really depends if you invested in their company or not.
Yeah. And dude, when I saw your post talking about how, everything is like the new hype crust with whatever, and it's mostly just OG crosses, I remember reading an article about those guys before the shit broke about them being invested in by big ag and all that. There was an article that said they had like 32 different submissions of different OG crosses, and they were all basically the same genetics. You know what I mean? Like just in different environments, and that was basically the only variation. Like the genotype was the same, but I guess the phenotype could have been different, and chemotype and all that. I was just like, that was surprising, and that's what that reminded me of your post too.
Well, I mean, if you follow a lot of the studies about cannabis human migration and then apply it to modern day, it makes a lot of sense. Like, we're seeing the same thing going on. I mean, someone in the 70s, 80s hit the market with OG, and it was something new, similar to Acapulco Gold when it first hit the market, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
it's always that counterculture of being competitive. I mean, that's always been there. What's the next best thing? And a lot of the times you see the same thing being bred over and over again, and it's not being preserved. It's not being refined for certain traits. It's just being hybridized over and over again.
No doubt, man. Okay, so I keep bouncing back and forth, dude. I apologize, but the flip side of my other question a while back, what do you think is your biggest mistake on the path to where you've been right now? Because everybody likes to talk about the good shit and the wins. I feel like the losses are relevant as far as building character and directions. You know what I mean, that you choose to take. So can you talk about that, man? Your biggest mistake.
Oh yeah. I mean, there it's all trial and error in the industry, and especially with the cannabis culture. As much as it has its highs, it has its lows as well. And I mean, I think my biggest mistake was trying to be open-minded in the way of collaboration. I've tried to work with a lot of people rather than vice versa, And I mean, don't get me wrong, I've had my interviews, collaborations with people that I respect. And then there's people who I've worked with who have, just completely disrespected the culture, disrespected me personally. And I mean, it's really who you associate with because there's people out there who monetize on the culture. And then there's people out there like myself who have a passion for it, who are just trying to find other people with a passion for it. And I mean, especially on Facebook, you see these groups pop up overnight, and then people are complaining they got ripped off a couple $100. And I mean,
Yeah.
can you complain really? I mean, it's just virtual at this point. It's been going on for years. It really depends on as we said before, reputation and knowing where you get your stuff.
Yeah. Like, dude, yeah. I've met some, I mean, most times people would just not meet up if they weren't solid, but I've met some cool people through groups here and there. Every now and then, like, because I, like, the past, like, 2 or 3 years that I was growing before I moved to AZ, I cracked seeds. So I would always have a bunch of extra plants, you know what I mean? So dudes would hit me up like, "Hey man, you get," and I'm like, "Yeah, man, trade for some nugs or trade for some oil," you know what I mean? And it was always cool like that. Dudes would just help each other out and vice versa. That's the part that I like about the online shit is every now and then someone's cool. You know what I mean? Like you, Hash Bricks, and I'm like, fuck, let me hit this dude up. You know what I mean? He sounds like a cool cat. Maybe he'll come on the show. You know?
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I love talking about cannabis. I mean, people that I know in person, they always try to shut me up because I talk too much about it. It's my passion. It's what I do, and if I could do it better and more professional, I would. Um, but it's like a lot of the times we're dealing with stuff like the state regulations and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, man. That shit does suck. What sort of ideas would you like to promote for the future?
What was that? You kind of clipping out.
Oh, my bad, dude. What sort of ideas would you like to promote for the future, as far as what you're working on, or the industry, or the community, or everything all together, man? Like, what kind of ideas would you like to promote? What kind of things would you like to see happen?
I would like to see, more support from the local state governments in way of helping people in an agricultural sense rather than in a business sense. I mean, it's similar to the hemp industry and how that played out for a little bit. I mean, there's people who are skilled agriculturalists, horticulturalists, botanists, and they want to get involved and apply their skills. I want to see a place for craft businesses. I want to see affordable licensing. I mean, all these things are necessary to pull in a community and establish a supply and demand that benefits everybody. I mean, if I could get licensing to grow, like 100 plants, I'd be preserving these genetics. I'd be helping my community. I would be paying taxes legally. And that's what most people want is they just want to be able to find their part and be able to, work, find a job, create a business, supply to the economy. Like
Yeah.
these are all these people who are being incarcerated for something that could be easily turned into a profitable industry without the stigma.
No doubt. Well said, sir. Well said. No, like for real, dude. I agree with all that, man. Same, brother. Same.
Yeah.
Um, is there? I guess we got a few minutes left, dude. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? I've been asking questions here and there, but is there anything else that you want to mention or talk about before we wrap up the episode?
Sure, man. I mean, I work a lot with genetics and stuff like that, and I'd like to encourage people that have a passion for it. There is a place for you. Go and try to find where you can apply your skill sets or apply to you know bring yourself to a professional standpoint, especially in the industry. There's a lot of stigma and stuff like that, but it's changing. We have a developing market. We have a developing industry in America, and there's colleges that are offering courses for this sort of thing. And I'd encourage people, invest. If you really have a passion for it, don't stay in the underground. Invest in your life, invest in your career. I mean, it's difficult with all the taxing and regulation and stuff like that, but that doesn't mean you can't research, study, and learn more as we develop these industries, man?
Yeah. Hell
I
yeah,
mean,
man. Yeah. Keep going, man, dude. Like to talk about it, bro.
I've been throughout the tri-state area. I keep up with a lot of states and how they go about their recreation and legalization, especially the medical industry. I mean, I was a medical patient, but the card's not worth it when you spend 1,400 on a couple ounces that aren't even considered, top nugs. I mean, I walked into this dispensary and they tried to explain to me that they were charging more for cola nugs and charging 55 and eighth for bottom nugs. And I
What the
mean,
fuck?
with my cultivation techniques, all I grow is cola nugs, man. It's
Yeah.
crazy. And I mean,
Yeah.
you see a
That's
lot of
why.
that in the industry. I mean, not to even mention the mold and powdery mildew levels. I mean, we're seeing a lot of that, especially in the medical industry and the legal industry, is protocols for sanitation, man. That's really what we should encourage for people is to learn how to divert these situations because that powdery mildew is not good for your medicine. It's not good for you. It's crazy.
Yeah. No doubt, man. Like yeah, that's one thing in Oregon too, dude. Like we always took pride in passing that test for mold and pesticides as medical growers, and then it's like once it went rec, there was no more mold test. They still check for pesticides, but now it was salmonella and E. coli and no mold. So it was like, and their reasoning was that, well, if you're purchasing it for recreational use, then mold isn't your concern anyway. You know what I mean? I'm like, what the fuck? Like that, like it made no sense to me, but whatever.
They're finding
Easier.
all these new pathogens that cannabis is acceptable to, and I mean that's another thing that we're talking about is like finding a reputable source for your medicine. I mean, I'm not trying to knock every dispensary, but I mean a lot of the people that you see in the black market have been doing it for a while, and that's why people go to them. It's kind of
Yeah.
like a question of would you go to Walmart to buy your weed or someone you've known for 5 to 10 years, right? Like
Serious. Yeah. If you get to shake hands with the guy who fucking makes it, then I trust that way more than fucking
that's
Walmart, man.
where I'm about, man. It's that
Yeah.
trust, and I've met so many underground breeders who trust me with their work, and collaborations. That's another thing is like it gets crazy. You gotta watch it because people see something that you have, and they'll try to be your best friend to get it. And I mean, I found more underground collaborations with people who just want to swap genetics and work on different cultivars rather than trying to get in the legal industry and do it. I mean, I had someone offer me their farm to cultivate my genetics, but they would own all the plants on the farm. So
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
those
that's not.
situations.
Yeah, dude, serious. I honestly meet a lot of cool underground breeders too that license one way or the other, but it's like their work is fucking phenomenal. I'm just thankful that I get to shake hands with and talk to him and shit. You know, it does. That means a lot more to me than Walmart. You know, or big money
Oh
cannabis,
yeah,
whatever. Yeah, and that's honestly, dude. That's why I appreciate you coming on the show, man. Like I hopefully want we can sit down and shake hands and smoke one, man. Exchange some beans.
definitely. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
man.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up is do you want to plug your social media? Like are you on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter?
Right now I'm not big on social media purposely. Uh,
Yeah.
I'm I'm
Staying
not
ninja
really
is
about
important.
that. But like, I mean, it's gotten to the point where I go to these events and people ask me for business cards or how to get a hold of me if for various reasons. And I mean, we're on Facebook. That's the only social media platform that I really care about at the moment. I mostly post my ideas, what's going on. I mean, I've been doing a lot of posts about micropropagation and vitro culture. That's where my study's leading me, and that's pretty much it. I mean, it's Hash Hands Genetics. If you find us on Facebook, you find us. If you don't, then it's probably Facebook's fault.
No doubt. Yeah. Okay. Well, so anybody who's listening, if you're on Facebook, Hash Hands Genetics, look for the guy. He's doing some awesome things with landrace genetics, and we really appreciate you coming on the show, Hash Brickson. Like we appreciate it.
Yeah, man, anytime.
And then I will send you the links once they become available. The YouTube should be up like right after this, but the Spotify uploads on Tuesday. So I'll email that to you, man. So hopefully you can share that with some friends. Hopefully they dig it, man. And then also, dude, hopefully we can have you back again on the show sometime in the future and see where you're at. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, man, definitely. I'd love to come back.
Okay, man. So that concludes our episode, ladies and gentlemen. I'm gonna go ahead and do my outro dance. This was the 40th episode of Concerned Dabs podcast. I was your host, KDM. With me tonight was my guest, Hash Brixon from Hash Hands. You can look them up online. Hash Hands. It's the guy. I gotta give a shout out to my guys in production, Mitchell Wilson and Jesse Curry. This has been a Main Node and Joseph Street Enterprise production.